good morning, good afternoon, or perhaps good evening. I am Shihan Ron Layton, and I'd like to introduce you to a brand new podcast. The podcast is called the Kwan Monolog. So what's the idea? Why are we doing this? Well, the central idea and the central focus is to have a conversation with noted practitioners from all across the Kwan family. Why would we do this? Well, quite simply, we're interested in learning more about our own people, what makes us special, what makes us tick. And hopefully we can get into some conversations, and we, as Kwan practitioners, we can learn more about our own people, the lived experiences of some of our most noted Kwan practitioners. So that's it. Short and sweet. Stay tuned for the Kwan Monolog. Take care. I'll be your host, Shihan Ron Layton. It is my distinct pleasure and honor to be the host of the Kwan Monolog. Today we have with us Shihan Pamela Hickey. Pam, welcome and good morning.
Good morning.
So the idea of this is just to make sure that we preserve some of the lived experiences of our great Shihan and our Kwan family. So that's kind of the idea behind this. And what is going to happen is we're going to have a conversation. We're going to have a back and forth a little bit. And to the listeners, you're going to be able to enjoy insights, and you're going to get to know a little better our personnel, what we think about martial arts. If you've been to symposium, you're going to find out that symposium is quite different than a regular class. It's my intent, it's my hope to provide a little bit of just the extraordinary lives and experiences of our Kwan folks. So with that, let's kind of get into these questions a little bit. So Pam, first of all, who are you and what do you do for a living?
Who am I? I'm a mother. I'm a yoga teacher. I'm a martial artist. I'm a musician. I have lots of hats. What was the other question you asked me?
Well, it's what do you do for a living as well? Because as we talk about all the time in the martial arts, we are not, and this is really important for the listeners, we are martial artists outside of the dojo as well. And so I think people are going to be interested in how we live that martial arts experience as either in our homes or in our professions, or when we go to the grocery store, we don't stop being martial artists. So what do you do for a living?
I work at the university, Kent State University. I teach yoga at the university there. I've done all kinds of other things in my career, though. I'm a registered nurse and worked as such. I run a dojo with my husband. I spent a lot of years on the mats teaching martial arts, in addition to all my other experiences. I'm a musician. I teach piano.
So as I recall, George Anderson, Hanshi Anderson, was also a musician.
Yes, he was. And that was a really nice connection between the two of us, because we shared that. But he was reluctant to play.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
And, I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but I really wanted to play with him. I love accompanying musicians. And he wouldn't do it. He just refused. He said, I won't do that. I only did it with my mother.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, and I was disappointed because I would have loved to do that.
That's interesting. So me, being a lover of music, but I couldn't sing or play a note, when I think of what you just said, the thing that popped into my head was synchronized kata. Is there some parallel there?
Perhaps. I suppose it is, because I think for George Anderson and me and myself, I think we probably had that in there. And I think that was one of our connections. I I always felt that we had a good connection, and I think the music was a lot of it.
All right. That's very cool. Let's move on to your martial arts history. Give us a kind of a summary of your martial arts history.
I had a fierce mother. I'm going to put that there first, because my mother was not well educated, but she was, I don't want to say she was sly. That's not the right word for it. But she was awake, and she used to teach me, if any boy on it ever tries to touch you there, you kick him as hard as you can between the legs. My mother would say that all the time. And so I always had this sense of, you need to fight for yourself, because my mom taught me that. But there weren't a lot of outlets for young women at that time. So I had finally in high school, I had somebody who actually was part of George Anderson's dojo. We had in our phys ed class, she did some martial arts. We learned how to fall. We learned how to get up. We learned how to do some kicking, and I loved it. It was Janet Lassiter. She was she was with George Anderson's dojo at the time.
So I'm always interested in, this was a question about your history in martial arts, and maybe we can wrap this into your introduction in martial arts, which you've kind of already answered. But I guess an offshoot of that question is, so many of us find ourselves having the experience where we think we're interested in martial arts, or we have heard about it and we just kind of show up at a dojo. And do you think a lot of it is the luck of the draw?
I don't think so. I don't know. So for me, when I went to the university, when I finally started college, I was placed in a class I didn't belong in. And it's a long story that doesn't matter. But that's where I met my husband, and he came in to teach the class. And somehow in that process, we ended up connecting up, of course. But he was going to some karate thing. He said, "Do you want to come?" And I said, "Sure." And that's where I met George Anderson.
So I'm assuming, it's a lot of times it's one instructor into another instructor, and then all of a sudden you realize that there's a larger family of folks who do this kind of thing. And then you find out it's not just one dojo. They're interconnected with other dojos, other people. There's this other aspect of martial arts. Maybe it's competition. Maybe it's some other aspect. But I think as a young person, you don't realize all of the martial arts tentacles once you start into training.
Well, for me, it was a good outlet because I was always really athletic. But there were no athletic things for girls to do where I lived. And I'm not sure if that's where you're going with this, but because I had met Pat and all these other things happened, he said, "Hey, I'm going to this thing. You want to come with me?" So I went to the class with him.
Now, we talked previously, and you've been training since you were 16 years old. Is that right? Okay.
Yes.
So that's training over a number of decades. And so in all of that time, in your martial arts experience, give me an idea of what some of your more significant moments, some of your more favorite experiences are, knowing full well that you can't say, well, this is the best ever, and then I had another one. It's kind of an array of things. Is that right?
Probably. Well, that's a hard question. Probably for me, as a kid who was always really athletic, that didn't have ways to do that because there just wasn't. I found that very satisfying. I was going it alone, taking care of myself, handling myself. I didn't have support from my family, so it made me feel safer and stronger. So that really resonated for me, to have both the pleasure of movement and feeling like I could take care of myself.
So we've talked a number of times about martial arts and your martial arts history and even music. And a number of times, Hanshi George Anderson has come up. So I guess I want to ask you specifically, how did Mr. Anderson influence you?
Oh, in a lot of ways. His generous look at the world was lovely instead of feeling confined. There was more of a sense of possibilities. He was joyful and he was fun. He was fearless. And those were all really good examples. Just a very free kind of way of seeing the world.
So, I always thought that Mr. Anderson he did so many things, but one of the things that he did was he brought an unusual intellect to something that people may think, yes, there's tremendous philosophy in the martial arts, but a lot of times that stuff is hard to explain. And he was somebody that spent a lot of time that you could tell that he brought that vast intellect to bear on martial arts, either principles or something in the martial arts that no one ever quite explained it in the way that he did. Did you find that to be true as well?
Yeah, I don't know that I thought of it that way, though, because I had never been in the martial arts before. And this was all really new at the time.
Right.
Extremely new.
So I want to ask you one of those questions that really taps into your length of time in the martial arts. If you think about the way that people trained when you started, when I started, and how you saw maybe an evolution over time. So the question is, where do you think martial arts are today?
That's a good question. I really don't know. I haven't paid attention. My sons were all part of this, and they were, immersed in it as a family. But out of those, the only one that's still doing that is Tom. And Tom is doing all grappling. He's not interested in martial arts. And that's what I see, is that I just don't see much of the other thing anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you ask me, I think a lot of the emergence of grappling in studios is because of what we see on television.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But Tom just really loves he just loves it. He loves doing it.
So certainly an aspect, so we are recording here at Symposium, and as we speak outside, there's a component of Symposium where they're talking about and instructing BJJ. Mm-hmm. So, it certainly had an influence on the martial arts in a modern perspective. Even if you were a judo player or a jiu-jitsu player many decades ago, the BJJ aspect, and particularly in the way that the format that they teach, feels new to me. And when you've been around as long as we have, new can still be the last 10 or 15 years, for sure.
Well, I think what Tom loves about it, what I see, or just in general, it isn't just standing up and moving around and showing you can balance or perform this musical kind of thing. There's a clear winner and a clear loser, and you're touching someone else.
Yeah.
And he really likes that.
We're talking about, really the evolution of martial arts in the way that it's practiced, in the way that it's taught, in the way that it's delivered to students. Now we've got social media. We certainly have had television for a while. But I want to ask you something that I think is important for the listeners. One of the goals of the podcast, as we talked about earlier, is the lived experiences of our own people. So try to dig into a little bit of what, and you've alluded to it a few times during the course of our chat here today, but give me some idea of what you think it's like from a woman's perspective in the martial arts. So one of the things that you talked about, and that you and I have talked about before, is athleticism. You were a young athlete, and I know a good athlete, but there weren't that many outlets available for girls at that time. So that's one aspect of this. This was an outlet that was readily available. I think another layer of this conversation is the influence with your mom that simply says, hey, if this happens, you're to do this, because there's some type of protective aspect that she wanted to make sure that you got and you understood. And so you also mentioned the whole notion about, hey, I needed to do things on my own. I didn't have a lot of support, and being able to keep myself safe was a really big aspect of that. So think about that from a woman's perspective.
You know what? I think the reason why I kind of blanked on that is I haven't felt unsafe for so long.
So you're a consequence of your own success, right?
I think so.
That's a big, big deal, right?
Yeah, never really thought about that. But yeah, I mean, I had to do a lot of things that were pretty scary, sort of, in terms of taking care of myself, walking away, to my place where I lived from school. And at least I learned some ways to not be frightened. I learned some ways that I thought would serve me well should I need to do it.
Isn't it so cool, though? Because we tell our students all the time that so much of what you do in the dojo transfers to your outside world, meaning outside of the dojo, whether it's confidence in school, confidence in walking home. It's exactly what you're talking about. But it might be to the point where you got this and you almost, I don't want to say take it for granted, but it's who you are.
Oh yeah, for sure. Because I think when I look at my 16-year-old self and my 25-year-old self, there was a whole lot of like, I'm not taking this stuff. And I never took it before, but I had better tools, even if it was just my voice, even if it was just my determination. And that really did serve me well, both where I was working, and it wasn't always thinking someone's going to come up and grab me. It was confronting people who were opposing what I needed to do.
So I think, for the listeners, I think we know this intuitively, but there are so many intangibles that come out of martial arts practice that it's kind of hard to quantify until we start to talk about these kind of experiences and stories. And so for me, I'm thinking, would you have the same level of confidence if you were not Shihan Pam Hickey Ninth Dan?
Well, I'm sure I wouldn't be. And it certainly did change me. And absolutely. And then I taught so many people here. I still run into people who, had the benefit of that from other women, particularly.
So we talked a little earlier too, during your Ninth Dan promotion, you talked about, going to the dojo and having it really be all of the things that we've just talked about over the last few minutes, but we also mentioned that, hey, it was a safe space. Talk about why that was important, how it might be important to young martial arts students, no matter if you're a man or a woman, but just the environment that the martial arts dojo, and I would say that martial arts instructors create for our students.
Yeah. Well, I think the way I would look at that for a lot of the women that I encountered in that, they came here because they wanted to feel safe and they wanted to feel like they could take care of themselves in subtle ways by developing even that confidence. If you never have to hit somebody or kick them, you could stand tall. And and I look back and I think I touched a lot of people with that. And of course I got stronger by teaching. We all get better. A lot of us learn simply by teaching.
So maybe, we talk about this martial arts ripple effect. All of the people, even if they don't come and they don't stay for a long time, but you think of all of the positive benefits from doing this, versus doing, some other aspect of human endeavor that you don't get all of those attributes.
Yeah, definitely. And I think people can get those things from other things besides martial arts. But the good thing about martial arts that I've never really thought of it this way. There's more than just thinking about it or deciding how you're going to handle a confrontation. There's also a mechanical part that goes to it. So the teaching is deeper and more entrenched because it's not just virtual or audible.
That's an interesting point. We're all just coming, we're certainly not post-pandemic, but we're getting there. And everyone is having to deal with teaching, if you're in the martial arts, teaching something, karate via Zoom. And I think at this point we all agree it's suboptimal. It's not quite as good. We don't have all of those things. It maybe was a decent stopgap, but I think most of us are looking forward to getting off of Zoom and back onto a mat. You agree?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I'm not teaching karate anymore. I'm teaching yoga, but yeah, I did yoga virtually on a screen. And, just doing whatever it is, whether it's martial arts or whether it's yoga, as a teacher, the thing you're teaching isn't necessarily the important part. It's the connection you make with these people and what they learn is, I think, much more important than whether they can do a really great kick or whether they can do some yoga pose. It's something else that they benefit.
So I would say that something else is probably the crux of who we are and what we are as a Kwan family. There's something else. You're not just showing up and learning how to punch or kick or learning bonkai or something like that, right?
Right. You're learning how to be a human.
A better human, as I would say.
Yes.
Well, as two better humans, we are going to conclude our podcast, and I can say that it was my distinct pleasure to have Shihan Pamela Hickey as our inaugural podcast. So, Pamela, thank you.
And thank you.